Sir, people like you don't eat here. Those were the exact words Victoria Hayes said to the man standing in the rain, the man holding his little girl's hand. She looked at his worn boots, his faded jacket, and decided he was nothing. What she didn't know was that his name was carved in stone above the door she was blocking. Every table, every chair, every dollar she earned, all of it belonged to him. Before we go on, tell me in the comments, what city are you watching from right now? I love seeing how far this story travels. And if you believe a person's worth isn't measured by their clothes, hit that subscribe button and stay with me until the very end. Because what this father does next, nobody in that restaurant will ever forget. Ethan Carter opened the door of his restaurant, and a woman he paid every single month told him to get out. Excuse me. Victoria Hayes stepped in front of him before he'd taken 3 steps inside. Her heels clicked once against the polished floor and stopped. Excuse me, sir. Ethan turned. Beside him, his 8-year-old daughter Lily gripped his hand a little tighter, her small notebook tucked under her other arm. Yes, Ethan said. Victoria looked him up and down. She took her time doing it. The navy jacket worn soft at the elbows, the jeans, the leather boots with a scuff across the toe from where he'd knelt on the garage floor that morning fixing the chain on Lily's bicycle. Are you here for the interview? She asked. The dishwasher position is filled, I'm afraid. If you left a resume, someone will call. Ethan blinked. For a second, he genuinely thought he'd misheard her over the rain drumming on the awning outside. No, he said. I have a reservation. Victoria's smile didn't move. It stayed fixed on her face like something painted there. A reservation. That's right. Under what name? He almost laughed. He almost said it right then. Carter, sweetheart, the name's on the wall behind your head. But something stopped him. Maybe it was the way she'd already decided. The way her eyes kept flicking to his boots, like they offended her. Carter, he said quietly. She didn't check a book. She didn't turn to the hostess stand, where a young girl named Dana stood frozen, her face gone pale, her mouth opening and closing like she wanted to speak and didn't dare. I'm sorry, Victoria said. I don't see it. You didn't look. Sir. Her voice sharpened just slightly the way a knife sharpens. You don't hear it. You just notice later that it cuts. We have certain standards here. Carter and Oak is a fine dining establishment. I think you'd be more comfortable somewhere else. There's a family place 2 blocks down. Very good burgers. Lily tugged his sleeve. Daddy? 1 second, baby. We come here every month, Lily said to Victoria, her voice small but clear. We sit at the table by the window. My mommy used to sit there too. Something flickered across Victoria's face. Not shame, not softness. Impatience. She crouched down not to be kind. Ethan saw, but to be efficient, the way you'd bend to talk to a stray dog you wanted to shoo off a porch. Sweetheart, Victoria said, I'm sure your daddy tries very hard, but this really isn't the place for you two today. Okay. And that was the moment Ethan Carter felt something go cold and still in his chest. Not anger. Anger would come later. In that moment, it was something quieter and far more dangerous. It was the feeling a man gets when a curtain he didn't know was there suddenly pulls back and he sees the room behind it for the first time. Because this woman didn't know who he was. And that meant this, the sneer, the dismissal, the people like you hanging unspoken in the air between them. This wasn't a performance for the boss. This was just her. This was what she did when she thought no one who mattered was watching. He looked past her into the dining room he had built with his own 2 hands. The wooden tables he'd sanded and stained every one of them in a rented workshop off King Street, back when he couldn't afford to hire it done. The paintings on the wall, Olivia had picked those walking the galleries downtown, with her belly round, with Lily laughing at the ones she called too fancy for us. The corner table by the window empty now, a little reserved card sitting on the white cloth. His reserved card. His table, and a woman he had trusted with all of it was crouched in front of his daughter, telling her to leave. Ethan drew a slow breath. You're right, he said. Victoria stood up satisfied, brushing an invisible speck from her sleeve. I'm glad you understand. If you... Come on, Lily. Ethan turned his daughter gently by the shoulder. Let's go, sweetheart. But Daddy, our table. I know, come on. He walked her back out through the door into the gray light and the rain, and behind him, he heard Victoria exhale a small private sound of relief of a job handled. He heard her heels click away. He heard her say brisk and bright to the frozen hostess, Dana, honestly, you can't just let anyone wander in off the street. Use your judgment. The door swung shut. Outside under the awning, Lily looked up at him with eyes so much like her mother's, it sometimes stopped his heart. Daddy, she said, did we do something wrong? And there it was. The knife found its mark after all. Not through him, but through her, through his 8-year-old, who had just learned in the space of 2 minutes that the world would look at your shoes and decide what you deserved. Ethan knelt down on the wet sidewalk, not caring about his jeans, and took both her hands. No, he said. Listen to me. Look at me, baby. You didn't do one single thing wrong. Not one. Do you understand me? Then why couldn't we? Because sometimes, Ethan said, choosing every word, grown-ups make mistakes. Big ones. And that lady made a very big one today. But it wasn't about you. It was never about you. He tucked a strand of wet hair behind her ear. You are the best thing I ever made. Better than anything in that whole building. You hear me? Lily nodded slowly. Then, in the way children do, she moved straight past the hurt to the practical. Are we still getting pancakes? Ethan let out a breath that was almost a laugh. Yeah, we're getting pancakes. He stood, and he took her hand, and they walked to the truck through the rain. And the whole way there, one thought turned over and over in his mind, slow and heavy as a millstone. How long has this been happening? Because Victoria Hayes hadn't hesitated. She hadn't fumbled or second-guessed. She'd looked at a man in worn boots and thrown him out of a restaurant with total practiced confidence. You don't get that confident doing a thing once. You get that confident doing it 100 times. And every one of those 100 times, it hadn't been the owner she'd turned away. It had been someone with no name on the wall. Someone with no way to fight back. So, that night, after Lily was asleep, Ethan sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee going cold in his hands, and did something he hadn't done in 3 years. He thought about Olivia, not the ache of her that lived in him, always low and constant like weather. He thought about the woman she'd been, the way she'd run the front of the house in the early days before the sickness. She used to say the same thing every single morning, standing in the doorway with her arms crossed, watching the staff set up. Everybody who walks through that door is somebody's whole world to somebody, Ethan. The banker and the busboy. You treat 'em the same or you don't deserve to feed either one. He'd built the whole place on that. Not on the menu, not on the reviews. On that. And then she'd gotten sick, and the world had narrowed down to a hospital room, and a little girl who needed her father, and Ethan had done what a drowning man does. He'd grabbed for the nearest solid thing and held on. He'd stepped back from the restaurant. He'd handed the keys to a sharp, ambitious young manager with a gleaming resume and references that sang. Victoria Hayes. For 3 years he'd told himself the numbers were what mattered. Revenue up, reviews up, awards, even a little brass plaque from the Charleston Dining Association that he'd never once gone in to see hung on the wall. He'd let the checks and the reports convince him that everything was fine because he needed it to be fine. He didn't have room in his life to worry about a restaurant. He had a grieving child and his own bottomless grief, and that was all a man could carry. But numbers, he understood now, are liars. Or not liars exactly, they just don't tell the whole truth. Revenue was up. Fine. But revenue doesn't tell you who you turned away to get it. A 5-star review from a man in a $5,000 suit doesn't tell you about the widow in the cardigan who got seated by the kitchen door, or the family with the crying baby who were told there'd be a 90-minute wait at 6 p.m. on a Tuesday until they finally gave up and left. People reveal who they really are when they think nobody important is watching. And for 3 years in his grief, Ethan Carter had not been watching. He set the coffee down. His hand was steady. His mind was clear in a way it hadn't been in a long, long time. He wasn't going to storm in there tomorrow and fire her. That was the easy thing, the small thing. That was revenge, and revenge would only tell him one story, the story of how Victoria Hayes treated the owner once she knew he was the owner. He needed the other story, the true one, the one she told when she thought no one who mattered was in the room. He needed to see it all. Sorry. He didn't go back the next day. He wasn't a fool. Instead, he made 2 phone calls. The first was to a man named Marcus, who had been the head chef at Carter & Oak since the very first night, since the days when the kitchen staff was Ethan, Olivia, and Marcus, and they'd all gone home smelling like garlic and burnt sugar and possibility. Marcus picked up on the second ring. "Boss? That really you?" "It's been Marcus." Ethan's voice was quiet. "I need you to do something for me, and I need you to not tell a single soul, especially not Victoria." A pause, then carefully. "Okay, I'm listening." "I came by yesterday, to the restaurant." "You what, boss? I didn't. Nobody told me you." "Nobody knew," Ethan said. "That's the point. Marcus, I want you to tell me the truth. And I mean the truth, not the version that keeps the peace. How bad is it in there?" The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long that Ethan thought the call had dropped. And then Marcus said something that Ethan would remember for the rest of his life. "Boss," he said, and his voice had gone rough, "I have been praying you would ask me that question for 2 years." Ethan closed his eyes. "Tell me everything," he said. And Marcus did. He told him about the young servers Victoria had fired, good kids, hard workers for the crime of comping a free dessert to a table with a birthday, or spending too long helping an old man in a wheelchair get settled. He told him about the dress code that had appeared for guests unwritten and unspoken, but ironclad, enforced entirely by Victoria's eye at the door. He told him about the menu, how the affordable dishes the ones families could actually order had quietly vanished one by one until the cheapest plate on the menu cost what a working man made in a half day. "She calls it elevating the brand," Marcus said, and Ethan could hear the disgust in it. "Every meeting. We're elevating the brand. Boss, we used to feed people. Now we sort 'em at the door, like mail." "Marcus?" Ethan's throat was tight. "Why didn't you call me?" "I tried," Marcus said quietly. "Twice. First year. Left messages with her office 'cause that's the number they gave us. Asked to talk to you." A bitter breath. "Never heard back. And after a while?" He trailed off. "After a while I figured you knew. I figured this was what you wanted now. And that just about broke my heart, boss. 'Cause it wasn't the man I knew. It wasn't Olivia's place anymore." Ethan sat very still. She'd intercepted the messages. Of course she had. She'd made herself the wall between him and everyone who'd ever tried to reach him. For 3 years, his own people had believed he'd abandoned them, when the truth was, he'd simply never gotten the letters. "It's still Olivia's place," Ethan said. His voice came out low and even and absolutely certain. "It was always Olivia's place, and I'm coming home, Marcus. But not yet. I need you to hold on a little longer, and I need you to keep this between us. Can you do that?" "I can do that." A beat. "Boss, it's real good to hear your voice." "You too, Marcus. You too." The second call was one he almost didn't make. He found the number on a business card that had been sitting in his kitchen drawer for a week, a card a woman had pressed on him at the hardware store of all places when they'd struck up a conversation in the plumbing aisle about, of all things, whether Charleston restaurants had lost their soul. She'd been sharp and funny, and she'd talked to him like an equal, which he'd noticed because so few people did anymore when he was dressed like a working man. Claire Bennett. Food and Culture. Charleston Post. He hadn't thought much of it at the time. Now he turned the card over in his fingers and thought about it a great deal. she answered brightly. Claire Bennett. Ms. Bennett, we met at Lowe's last week, talked about restaurants and their souls and whether— The plumbing aisle philosopher, she said, delighted. I've been thinking about half of what you said all week. You never told me your name. Ethan hesitated. Even now, even here, some careful instinct held the truth back one more beat. You're working on something, he said instead. About a restaurant. Aren't you? The delight in her voice cooled into something professional and watchful. Now, why would you say that? Because you asked me 3 questions about Carter and Oak, Ethan said, and none of them were casual. A long pause. Who are you? Claire asked, and Ethan Carter looked at the photo on his kitchen wall. Olivia in the doorway of a half-finished restaurant, paint on her jeans, laughing at something outside the frame, and he made his decision. I'm the man who owns it, he said. And I think you and I are looking at the same problem from 2 different doors. I'd like to hear what you've found, and then I'd like to tell you what I'm going to do about it. The silence on the line this time was electric. Mr. Carter, Claire Bennett said slowly, I have a folder on my desk 2 inches thick, and for 3 months I have been trying to figure out one single thing that has been driving me out of my mind. What's that? Where the owner went, she said. Because everything I've dug up says this used to be the most decent place in the city, and then one day it just stopped being decent. And nobody could tell me why. Ethan looked at Olivia's photograph a moment longer. I can tell you why, he said. I stopped watching, but that's over now. His hand closed around the edge of the table. Ms. Bennett, how would you like to know exactly what's happening inside that building? Not from a folder, from the inside, from a customer nobody thinks to lie to. He could practically hear her sit up straight. You're going undercover, she said. In your own restaurant. Every table's already mine, Ethan said. I just have to go find out who's really sitting at them, and who's being turned away at the door before they ever get the chance. Just so. He hung up. The rain had stopped. Through the kitchen window, the Charleston night was clean and dark, and full of the smell of wet stone. He climbed the stairs and stood a moment in Lily's doorway, watching her sleep, the notebook of drawings still open on her nightstand where she'd left it. He crossed and picked it up, meaning only to close it, and stopped. She'd drawn the restaurant, the corner table, the big window. 3 stick figures at the table, a tall one, a small one, and one with long hair that could only be a mommy. She barely remembered, drawn from photographs and the stories he told her at bedtime. Above them, in careful, wobbly 8-year-old letters, she'd written, Our Table. Ethan stood there in the dark for a long time. Then he set the notebook down, and he pulled the blanket up over his daughter's shoulder, and he went to bed with the first true purpose he'd felt in 3 years, burning steady in his chest. Victoria Hayes had looked at his boots and decided he was no one. She was about to learn exactly whose restaurant she'd been standing in. But not tomorrow. Tomorrow, Ethan Carter was going back to Carter and Oak, not as the owner, not in a suit, not with lawyers. He was going back as a customer, and he was going to sit quietly in the corner of his own life and watch and listen and see every last thing that a woman does when she is absolutely certain that nobody important is in the room. He had no idea yet how much worse it was going to get before it got better. He didn't know about the investors. He didn't know about the paperwork already moving in the dark, the plan to take his name off the wall for good. He only knew what any good father knows sitting in the quiet after his child has fallen asleep. That some things are worth protecting. And that a man who has already lost the love of his life does not, will not, cannot lose the last thing she left him. He would get it back. All of it. Every table, every chair, every soul in that building who'd been turned away and made to feel like they didn't belong. He would get it all back. And he would start tomorrow in worn boots at the door of the thing he built, knocking like a stranger to be let into his own home. The morning Ethan Carter walked back into his own restaurant as a stranger, he wore the same navy jacket, the same worn boots, and he did it on purpose. He parked his truck 3 blocks away so no one would see it. He'd thought about that. A man who owned a place like Carter and Oak didn't drive a 10-year-old pickup with a cracked taillight, and Victoria Hayes was the kind of woman who noticed cars. So he walked the last 3 blocks in the Tuesday morning, cold hands in his pockets, and he stopped across the street and looked at the name above the door. Carter and Oak. His name. Olivia's dream. And for the first time in 3 years, he was afraid to walk into it. He almost turned around. That was the truth he'd never tell anybody. He stood on that sidewalk, and a voice in his head said, "Go home, Ethan. You don't need this. Hire a lawyer. Do it clean. Do it from a distance." But then he thought about Lily on the wet sidewalk, asking, "Did we do something wrong?" And his feet started moving before his fear could stop them. The little brass bell over the door rang when he pushed it open. That bell had been Olivia's idea too. She'd found it at a flea market in Beaufort and hung it herself, standing on a chair she shouldn't have been standing on, 8 months pregnant, telling him a restaurant should sound happy when somebody comes home. Nobody looked happy today. The young hostess, Dana, the same girl who'd frozen on Saturday, looked up from the stand and went pale all over again. Recognition. She remembered him. Her eyes darted toward the back of the dining room, then back to his face, and her mouth opened. "Good morning," Ethan said, easy and quiet, before she could speak. "Table for 1. Somewhere out of the way is fine." "Sir," she whispered, leaning across the stand. "Sir, I am so sorry about Saturday. That should never have. I tried to. I wanted to say something and I... Are you okay? Is your little girl okay?" And that told Ethan something important, something that made his chest hurt in a good way. This girl had a conscience. She'd watched a man and his daughter get thrown out, and it had been eating at her for 3 days. "We're okay," Ethan said gently. "You didn't do anything wrong. What's your name?" "Dana." "Dana, you're not the one who owes anybody an apology." "All right now. Is there a quiet table?" She sat him at a two-top near the back wall, half hidden by a wooden partition Ethan himself had built, and from there he could see almost the entire dining room. He ordered coffee. He opened a newspaper he'd brought so he'd have somewhere to put his eyes. And then Ethan Carter did the hardest thing a proud man can do. He sat still in a room that belonged to him, and he made himself invisible, and he watched. It didn't take long. 9:40 in the morning, an old man came in alone. Thin, careful, a cardigan, buttoned all the way up, one of those men who dresses every single morning like the day still deserves his best, even when there's nobody left to dress for. He had a cane. He moved slow, and Ethan watched Victoria Hayes clock him from across the room the way a hawk clocks a field mouse. She got to him before Dana could. "Good morning," Victoria said, and Ethan could hear it from 30 feet away, that voice warm on the surface and cold underneath like a lake in April. "Do you have a reservation with us this morning?" "No, ma'am," the old man said. "Just me. I heard the biscuits here were something. My wife used to." "I'm so sorry," Victoria said. "Not sorry at all. We're fully committed this morning. It's a very busy day." Ethan looked around the dining room. It was a Tuesday. There were maybe 11 people in a room that seated 90. The old man looked around too. He wasn't a fool. He saw the empty tables. And Ethan watched the exact moment the man understood, watched his shoulders come down, watched him decide not to make a thing of it, because men of that generation don't make a thing of it. They just fold up their dignity and carry it back out the door. "Course," the old man said quietly. "Course you are. Sorry to trouble you." He turned to go, and Ethan Carter's hand tightened around his coffee cup until his knuckles went white, and it took everything he had, everything, to stay in that chair, because that was the whole thing right there, wasn't it? That was Victoria Hayes in one clean motion. She hadn't yelled. She hadn't been cruel, not on the surface. She'd just looked at a lonely old man in a buttoned cardigan and decided he wasn't worth a biscuit, and she'd sent him back out into the cold with a smile. But somebody else saw it too. From the kitchen doorway, Marcus was watching. Big Marcus, still in his chef's whites, a towel over one shoulder, and his jaw was set like stone. His eyes found Ethan across the room. Just for a second, a flicker, and Marcus gave him the smallest nod, a nod that said, "You see it now, boss. You see what I've been living with." Ethan looked back down at his newspaper before Victoria could catch the look passing between them. But the old man wasn't gone yet. He'd stopped at the door. His hand was on the handle, and then in a voice that shook just a little, he turned back and said, "You know I ate here 4 years ago, with my Ruth, before she passed. Man who owned it came out and sat with us, talked 45 minutes about nothing, refilled our coffee himself." He looked at Victoria. "I don't guess he's around." And Ethan stopped breathing. Victoria's smile didn't even flicker. "The ownership isn't involved in daily operations," she said smoothly. "Have a good morning, sir." The bell rang. The door closed. The old man was gone, and Ethan sat in the back of his own restaurant with a cold cup of coffee and his dead wife's flea market bell still trembling on its hook, and he understood that he had not just been absent. He had been erased, wiped clean off the walls of the thing he built. To that old man, to God knew how many others, Ethan Carter was a ghost, a story, a nice thing that used to happen here before the place turned mean. He got Dana's attention with a small lift of his hand and left a 20 on the table for a $2 coffee, and he walked out into the cold, and he stood on the sidewalk and made himself breathe until the shaking stopped. Then he pulled out his phone and called Claire Bennett. "I need to see your folder," he said. "Today. All of it." They met at a diner across town, the kind of place with vinyl booths and a coffee pot that never stopped moving, the kind of place Victoria Hayes had turned Carter and Oak into the opposite of. Claire was already there when Ethan arrived, a slim woman in her 40s with reading glasses pushed up into her hair and a manila folder in front of her so thick it had a rubber band around it. She looked up at him and studied his face for a long moment. "You look like a man who just saw something," she said. "I saw her turn away an 80-year-old widower who came in asking about the biscuits his dead wife loved," Ethan said, sliding into the booth. "Told him she was fully committed. Room was empty." Claire didn't say anything right away. She slid the folder across the table. "Then you're ready to look at this," she said. Ethan pulled off the rubber band. For the next hour he read, and every page made the room a little colder. The complaints came first. Claire had gathered dozens pulled from review sites, from a consumer affairs board, from her own inbox after she'd started asking around. And Ethan saw the pattern that had first caught a journalist's eye, the thing Claire had told him she couldn't stop thinking about. It was never the food. Not once. The food was still Marcus's food, and Marcus's food was still magnificent. It was the door. It was always the door. Family of 5 told there was a 2-hour wait at 5 in the afternoon. A man in a wheelchair informed the accessible seating was, quote, unavailable. A birthday party for a little girl turned away because, and this one made Ethan's hands go still on the table, because, quote, the party did not meet the atmosphere the restaurant was cultivating. "There's a name in almost every one," Claire said quietly, watching his face. "You'll notice it." He'd already noticed it. Victoria, the manager, a woman in a black suit. She's in nearly every one of them, Ethan thought, like a bruise that shows up in every photograph. "It gets worse," Claire said. "Keep going." He kept going. And under the complaints were the reviews, the good ones, the 5-star ones, and Claire had highlighted them in yellow, and Ethan understood why. Because the 5-star reviews all said the same thing too. Exclusive. Elite. Not for everyone. One of them, from a man Ethan happened to know, was a commercial real estate developer, actually used the words, "Finally, a place in this city that keeps the riff-raff out." "She built exactly what she wanted," Claire said. "And she built it out of your restaurant. Brick by brick. And the terrible thing, Mr. Carter, the thing I couldn't make my editor understand, is that by every metric that shows up on a spreadsheet, she's a genius. Revenue's up 30%. Average check has doubled. The trade magazines love her. She's giving talks now. Panels. She's got a whole. She calls it a philosophy." "A philosophy," Ethan repeated. "Curated hospitality." Claire said the words like they tasted bad. That's the phrase. I sat in the back of a conference downtown 2 months ago and watched 200 people give her a standing ovation for a talk about, and I'm quoting her slides here, protecting brand equity through selective access. She leaned back. She's not hiding, Mr. Carter. That's what took me so long to understand. She's not embarrassed. She thinks she's the hero of this story. She thinks she saved your restaurant from itself. Ethan set the folder down. His coffee had gone cold again. He seemed to be leaving a trail of cold coffee across the city. Ms. Bennett, he said. Can I ask you something, and will you tell me the truth? Always. Why hasn't this run yet? You've got a folder 2 inches thick. You've got a pattern. You could publish tomorrow and put a dent in her. Why are you sitting on it? And Claire Bennett looked at him for a long moment, and something in her face changed, got more honest. 2 reasons, she said. First one's simple. Everything in that folder is a person feeling unwelcome. And feeling unwelcome isn't a crime, and it isn't legally speaking a story. My editor reads all this and says, so what, some restaurant got snobby slow news day, come back when somebody breaks a law. She tapped the folder. I need something with teeth, and I didn't have it. You said 2 reasons. Claire hesitated. And then she reached into her bag and pulled out a single sheet of paper folded in thirds, and she held it a moment before she gave it to him. The second reason, she said, is that 3 weeks ago somebody sent me this, anonymously. And when I read it, I stopped trying to write a story about a rude manager. She slid it across. And I started trying to find you. Ethan unfolded the paper. It was a photocopy of a document. The header at the top said, Meridian Capital Partners in cold gray letters, and below that, in the flat dead language of finance, was a phrase that stopped Ethan Carter's heart in his chest. Reacquisition and rebranding. Carter and Oak Restaurant Group. Proposed timeline for ownership transition. He read it twice, 3 times. The words swam. I don't understand, he said. But even as he said it, he did understand. He understood perfectly. It was just that his mind was refusing to hold the shape of it, because the shape of it was too ugly. They're going to buy you out, Claire said gently. Or that's the plan. And Mr. Carter, the thing that made me spend 3 weeks trying to track down a ghost is that you can't buy out an owner who doesn't want to sell. Not unless. She stopped. Not unless somebody convinces the money that the owner's already gone, checked out, absent, not fit to run his own company. Somebody on the inside. Somebody who could show them 3 years of the owner never showing up, never returning a call, never signing a thing, letting a manager run the whole show. Ethan's mouth was dry. She intercepted my calls, he heard himself say. Marcus tried to reach me, twice. She sat on the messages. For 3 years, anybody who tried to reach me went through her office, and I never. He looked up. She's been building a case, that whole time. She wasn't just running the restaurant into a country club. She was documenting me, making me look like a man who abandoned his own company so that when the buyers came, the story would already be written. Claire nodded slowly. That's what I think too. And there it was. The teeth. The thing Ethan Carter hadn't seen coming, sitting in a vinyl booth in a diner across town. It wasn't just that Victoria Hayes was cruel to old men in cardigans. It was that the cruelty had a purpose. Every family turned away, every affordable dish removed, every warm thing scraped out of that restaurant. It hadn't been snobbery. It had been demolition. She was tearing down Olivia's restaurant on purpose, stud by stud, so she could sell the empty lot. How long? Ethan said. His voice had gone very quiet and very steady, the way a man's voice goes when the fear finally burns off and leaves something harder underneath. How long until they close? Claire turned the paper over. On the back, in the same anonymous hand that had sent it, someone had written a single date. The board meeting. 6 weeks out. 6 weeks, Claire said. 6 weeks and there's a signature on a piece of paper, and the name comes off the wall, and it becomes something called the Meridian, and every person who ever felt at home in that room becomes a story an old man tells at the door before they turn him away. She folded her hands. Unless? Unless what? Unless the owner walks into that board meeting, Claire said, and isn't a ghost. Ethan Carter sat with that. Outside the diner window, Charleston went about its Tuesday cars and pedestrians, and a delivery truck double-parked a whole city full of people who had no idea that in a booth behind fogged glass, a man had just found out he had 6 weeks to save the last thing his wife ever gave him. "I need to know who sent you this," he said. "So do I." But they were careful. No return address, city postmark cut and paste letters like a ransom note from a movie. Claire tilted her head. Somebody on the inside, though. Somebody who knows about Meridian and hates it. Somebody with a conscience and no power. And in Ethan's mind, unbidden, rose the image of a pale young hostess leaning across a stand whispering, "I tried to say something I wanted to." He didn't say the name out loud, not yet. He'd protect her until he knew for sure. "Ms. Bennett." Ethan said, "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to keep building your story, quietly, and I'm going to keep going into that restaurant as a nobody, and I'm going to see every single thing there is to see, so that when I walk into that board meeting, I don't walk in with a folder. I walk in with the truth, all of it, told by the people who lived it." He stood and set money on the table and picked up the folder. "She's had 3 years to write the story of Ethan Carter. I've got 6 weeks to correct the record." Claire looked up at him. "You know she's good, right? I've watched her work a room. She'll have an answer for everything. She'll cry if she has to. She'll turn it around, make herself the victim, the loyal manager stabbed in the back by an absentee owner who suddenly cares now that there's money on the table. I'm counting on it," Ethan said. "I want her comfortable. I want her certain she's already won. Because you're right about one thing, Ms. Bennett." He put the rubber band back around the folder. "She thinks she's the hero of this story." He tucked the folder under his arm. "I'm going to let her keep thinking that," he said, "right up until the last possible second." Over the next 3 weeks, Ethan Carter went to war the only way a patient man goes to war. Slowly, in worn boots, 1 cup of cold coffee at a time. He became a regular. Twice, 3 times a week, always the same back table, always dressed like a man who fixed bicycles on Saturday mornings, which he was. Dana learned to have his coffee ready. And slowly, table by table, day by day, Ethan Carter watched his restaurant confess. He watched Victoria run off a young server named Tyler, a kid of maybe 19, because Tyler had crouched down to talk to a little boy in a booster seat, made the kid laugh, done a magic trick with a sugar packet. Victoria pulled him aside after, and Ethan couldn't hear the words, but he could read the body, the boy's shoulders folding in the flush climbing his neck, and by the end of the week, Tyler wasn't on the schedule anymore. Ethan wrote it down that night in a notebook he'd started keeping. Tyler, sugar packet, made a child laugh. Gone. He watched her seat a table of loud, wealthy men who'd clearly had a 3-martini lunch somewhere else. First, seat them at the best table in the house, the window table, and comp their appetizers, while a young couple who'd saved up, you could tell they'd saved up. The girl kept touching her nice dress like she wasn't used to it, got tucked by the kitchen door, and rushed through their meal by a server Victoria was clearly watching. And every day Marcus fed him. Not officially. Ethan would order the special, and it would come out with something extra, a little dish of the old cornbread that wasn't on the menu anymore, and once wordlessly, a single biscuit. The biscuit. Olivia's recipe. Ethan looked at it on the plate and had to put his newspaper up in front of his face for a minute. They talked in the alley sometimes, when Marcus took his break. Quick, quiet conversations, by the dumpster. 2 men who'd built something together 20 years ago, figuring out how to save it. "She's got a meeting on the 14th, Marcus told him one afternoon, lighting a cigarette he'd quit 6 times. "Private dining room, whole afternoon blocked off. Bunch of suits I never seen. She had me do a tasting menu for 8, told me it was, and I'm quoting her an important partnership conversation." He blew smoke at the sky. "Meridian was on the reservation, boss. I saw the book. Meridian Capital, party of 8. Ethan's pulse ticked up. "The 14th. That's this Thursday." "Yeah." Marcus looked at him. "Whatever you're planning. Might want to be around." So on Thursday, Ethan was around. He didn't go in. That would have been too much. Instead, he sat in the diner across the street. The actual diner, the Greasy Spoon, 2 blocks down, that Victoria had once directed him toward very good burgers. And he watched the door of his own restaurant through the window, and at 1 o'clock, the suits arrived. 4 cars. The kind of cars Victoria noticed. And out of them came men and women in the uniform of money. And at the center of them, holding the door, smiling her lake. In April's smile was Victoria Hayes, in a suit that cost more than Ethan's first month of rent on the original space. And then a 5th car pulled up. And out of it stepped a man Ethan recognized. His stomach dropped. He knew that face. Silver hair, good coat, the confident slouch of a man who'd never once been turned away from anywhere in his life. Ethan had seen that face in a highlighted 5-star review not 2 weeks ago. Finally, a place that keeps the riff-raff out. The commercial real estate developer. And now here he was, stepping out of a car in front of Carter and Oak, shaking Victoria Hayes' hand like an old friend. And Ethan understood that the rot went deeper than a folder of complaints, deeper than a rude manager. This was a machine. Money and access and a woman on the inside, all of it pointed at one thing, taking his name off that wall and putting up their own. Ethan sat very still in the diner and did not touch his coffee, and thought for the first time that he might actually lose. That was the low point. He'd tell Lily about it years later when she was old enough to understand. He'd say there was one afternoon baby where I sat in a diner and watched them all walk into our place, and I thought they're bigger than me. They've got more money than me. They've been planning this for years, and I found out 3 weeks ago. I thought about calling a lawyer and settling. Just taking a check and walking away and keeping you safe and never having to fight. And then something happened that changed everything. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Back door. Now. Please. It's Dana. Ethan was up and across the street before he'd finished reading it. He found her in the alley by the dumpster, the same spot he and Marcus talked, and she was shaking, wringing her hands, looking over her shoulder at the back door of the restaurant like it might come after her. Dana? Ethan said. Hey. Breathe. What's wrong? I gave the note to that reporter, she blurted. The Meridian thing. That was me. I photocopied it off Victoria's desk, and I mailed it to the food writer, 'cause I didn't know what else to do, and I've been so scared. And then you started coming in. And I looked you up. I found an old article. From when the restaurant opened. There's a picture. Her voice cracked. It's you. You're him. You're Mr. Carter, the real one. And I've been serving you coffee for 3 weeks, and I couldn't figure out why you kept coming back. And now they're all in there right now signing papers, and I heard them. I was clearing plates. I heard the silver-haired man say, once the transition's clean, we tear out the whole front, and She was crying now. They're going to take it, she wept. They're going to take it, and there's nothing anybody can do, because you're not even, everybody thinks you're gone. They think you don't care. She's told everybody you don't care. Ethan Carter put his hands on the shaking girl's shoulders. Dana, he said, look at me. You are the bravest person in that entire building. Do you understand me? You saw something wrong, and you had no power, and you did the only thing you could think of, and it worked. It reached the exact person it needed to reach. He held her gaze until she steadied. You didn't fail. You started this. You're the reason I know. And now I need you to do one more brave thing. I need you to go back inside, dry your eyes, and act like everything is completely normal. Can you do that? She sniffed. What are you going to do? And Ethan Carter looked up at the back of his restaurant at the kitchen exhaust, and the stacked crates, and the whole unglamorous guts of the thing he'd built, and something settled in him. The fear finally burning all the way off, leaving nothing but the hard, bright thing underneath. I'm going to give them their clean transition, he said quietly. I'm going to let them sign every piece of paper they want. I'm going to let Victoria Hayes stand up in that boardroom in 6 weeks and take a bow. He looked at Dana. And then I'm going to walk in through the front door of my own restaurant in a suit this time, and I'm going to sit down in the one chair she spent 3 years trying to take from me. And I'm going to let her explain in front of every one of those investors exactly why she thinks the man who built this place isn't good enough to eat in it." Dana stared at him. And then, through her tears, she did something that Ethan would carry with him a long time. She smiled. "Can I be there?" she said. "When you do it. Please. I want to see her face." "Dana," Ethan said, "I'm going to need you there. You and Marcus both. Because I'm not walking into that room with a folder." He squeezed her shoulders once and let go. "I'm walking in with witnesses." That night, Ethan sat at his kitchen table long after Lily had gone to sleep, and he made his lists, and he made his calls, and one by one, the pieces came together. He called an old friend from the early days, a lawyer named Ruth Ann, who'd helped him incorporate Carter & Oak 20 years ago, back when the whole company fit in a shoebox. She listened to the entire story without interrupting, and when he finished, there was a long silence on the line. "Ethan," she finally said, "I'm going to ask you a question, and I need you to think before you answer. When's the last time you actually read your own operating agreement? The one you signed when you brought Hayes on as GM." Ethan's stomach tightened. "I don't. Ruth Ann, I was. Olivia had just... I signed a lot of things that year. I wasn't reading." "That's what I was afraid of," Ruth Ann said. "Because for Meridian to buy you out for any of this to work, they need a clean path to your ownership stake, and the only way they get one is if somewhere in the last 3 years you signed something that gave it to them. A power of attorney, an authorization, something that lets your general manager act on the company's behalf in a sale." A pause. "Did she ever put papers in front of you, Ethan, in those years, when you weren't reading?" And Ethan Carter went cold all over because yes, she had. Twice a year, maybe a courier would come to the house with a folder of routine documents, tax filings, licensing renewals, boring necessary things, and a note from Victoria's office saying, "Just sign the flagged pages, Mr. Carter standard annual paperwork." And Ethan, drowning, grieving, holding a motherless child, had signed the flagged pages without reading a single word. "Oh God," he said, "I need to see everything you signed." Ruth Ann said all business now. Every document that came from that office in 3 years. Because if she buried an authorization in one of those folders, if she got your signature on a page that gives her the power to sell, then Ethan, I'm sorry, but they don't need to remove you at that board meeting. You may have already removed yourself, years ago, without knowing it. The line went quiet. Ethan stared at the photo on his kitchen wall. Olivia in the doorway, paint on her jeans, laughing. "Then we find it," he said, and his voice did not shake. "We find whatever I signed, and if she buried a knife in one of those folders, Ruth Ann, then that's not just business anymore. That's fraud. That's a woman who tricked a grieving man into signing away his dead wife's dream while he was too broken to read the fine print." He stood up. "And a jury in Charleston is going to have some feelings about that." For the first time, he heard Ruth Ann's careful lawyer voice crack into something warmer. Something almost fierce. "Send me the folders," she said. "All of them. Tonight if you can. Ethan, I did the paperwork the day you opened that place. I watched you and Olivia sign the lease with a pen you borrowed from the realtor because you'd forgotten your own." A breath. "I am not going to sit here and watch some spreadsheet with a law degree take it apart. Send me the folders." Ethan spent until 3 in the morning in the garage going through boxes, and he found them. 3 years of folders from Victoria's office, each one a courier's delivery he'd barely glanced at. He scanned every page and sent them all to Ruth Ann. And then he sat on the cold garage floor, surrounded by the paper evidence of his own grief and absence, and he did not sleep. 2 days later, Ruth Ann called back, and her voice when he answered was the voice of a woman holding a live wire. "Ethan," she said, "are you sitting down? Tell me. She got you." A pause. 18 months ago, page 9 of a folder marked Annual Compliance. It's a limited authorization granting the general manager the power to, And I'm reading the exact language negotiate and execute agreements pertaining to the strategic disposition of company assets. You signed it. It's your signature. It's dated. It's witnessed by a notary I've never heard of, who I'm willing to bet was in her pocket. Ethan closed his eyes. So she has the power to sell. That's the bad news, Ruth Ann said. You ready for the good news? Ethan opened his eyes. There's good news. Ethan, Ruth Ann said. And now there was something almost like joy in it. The joy of a lawyer who has found the one loose thread in a beautiful sweater. She got greedy, and she got sloppy, because that authorization has a condition on it, right there in the same paragraph she buried it in. Its only valid quote in the event that the principal owner is unable or unwilling to fulfill his duties. Unable or unwilling. A pause. She wrote that in to make it look legitimate, to make it look like a safety measure in case something happened to you. But do you understand what she did, Ethan? Do you understand what that little phrase means? And slowly sitting in his kitchen, Ethan Carter began to smile. The first real smile in 3 weeks. It means, he said, that the whole thing only works if I'm gone. It means, Ruth Ann said that the entire multi-million-dollar house of cards she has spent 18 months building rests on one single load-bearing assumption, that Ethan Carter is unwilling or unable to run his own company. He could hear her smiling too. So here's my question for you, counselor to client. Are you unwilling? Are you unable? Ethan looked at the photo of Olivia in the doorway. No, ma'am, he said. I am ready, willing, and extremely able. Then all you have to do, Ruth Ann said, is show up. That's it. That's the whole game. She has spent 3 years telling everyone with money that you're a ghost. All you have to do is walk into that boardroom alive. The second you sit down in that chair and say, I'm here and I'm running my company, that authorization is void. Dead paper. And every agreement she signed with Meridian on the strength of it turns into confetti. A pause. But Ethan, hear me. She will know this too, or her lawyers will. Which means the one thing she cannot allow, the one thing that ends her, is for you to be in that room. She has 6 weeks to make sure you never walk through that door. And a woman who forged a grieving man's authorization is a woman who's already shown you what she's willing to do. Let her try to keep me out, Ethan said quietly. She already tried that once. In the rain, with my daughter's hand in mine. He stood. She has no idea how that story ends. He hung up. And for a long moment, Ethan Carter stood alone in his kitchen, with the whole shape of it finally clear in front of him. He knew what she'd done. He knew how she'd done it. He knew the one thing that could stop her, and he knew she'd move heaven and earth in the next 6 weeks to keep him out of that room. He climbed the stairs and stood in Lily's doorway, watching her sleep the drawing of their table still on the nightstand. Our table. And he thought about the old man in the cardigan folding up his dignity and carrying it out the door. He thought about Tyler and the sugar packet. He thought about Dana crying in the alley, brave enough to mail a note to a stranger. He thought about Marcus praying for 2 years that somebody would finally ask him the truth. He thought about the young couple by the kitchen door, the girl touching her nice dress. All those people. Turned away, pushed out, made small, so that a machine of money could take a man's name off a wall. Ethan Carter pulled the blanket up over his daughter's shoulder. 6 weeks, he whispered to the dark. Sweetheart, in 6 weeks I'm going to show you exactly what your daddy is made of. And I'm going to show that lady too. He went to bed. And somewhere across the city, in an elegant black suit, in an office that had once been her boss's, Victoria Hayes worked late into the night on a plan she was absolutely certain had already won, with no idea at all that the ghost she'd been counting on had just come fully dangerously back to life. The next 6 weeks did not go the way Ethan Carter planned, and the first sign of that came on a Monday morning, when Ruth Ann called him at 7 in the morning and said 4 words that changed everything. They moved it up. Ethan set down his coffee. Moved what up? The board meeting, the transition vote. It was 6 weeks out. It's now 9 days. Ruth Ann's voice was tight and fast. I got it from a paralegal I know at the firm handling Meridian's side. Somebody spooked them. Somebody told them to close fast. Ethan stood very still in his kitchen. 9 days. He'd had a plan built on 6 weeks on patience, on slowly gathering witnesses, and building a case airtight enough to survive a room full of lawyers. And now somebody had reached into that plan and torn 6 weeks down to 9 days. How? Ethan said. How would they know to move fast? We've been careful. I've been a nobody in worn boots. Nobody knows I'm. And then he stopped, because he did know how. Dana, he breathed. What? Somebody saw me talking to Dana. Or Marcus. Somebody put it together. Somebody in that building figured out that the man who's been drinking coffee at the back table 3 times a week is the owner, and they ran to Victoria, and Victoria panicked and told Meridian to close before I could. Ethan was already moving, grabbing his keys. Ruth Ann, if they figured out I know, then Dana's in danger. Not I mean her job. Her job's the least of it. If Victoria knows Dana's the leak. Go, Ruth Ann said. Go. I'll keep working. But Ethan, listen to me first. One thing. 9 days. In 9 days, that authorization is either void because you walked into that room, or it's executed and the sale is done, and it's a 2-year lawsuit to unwind it if we can unwind it at all. There is no version of this where you sit back and let it happen clean. You have to be in that room in 9 days, whatever it takes. I'll be in the room, Ethan said, and hung up and drove. He got to the restaurant at 8:15, and it wasn't open yet, and he went around back to the alley, and Dana wasn't there, and the knot in his stomach pulled tighter. He called the number she'd texted from. Straight to voicemail. He called it again. Voicemail. And then the back door opened, and it wasn't Dana. It was Marcus. And the look on Marcus's face told Ethan everything before Marcus said a word. They fired her, Marcus said. Friday, after you left. Victoria called her in, and boss? I don't know what she said behind that door, but Dana came out white as a sheet, and she was crying. And she cleaned out her locker, and she didn't even say goodbye to anybody. Just left. Marcus wiped his hands on his apron, a nervous gesture. And this morning Victoria calls a staff meeting real early before service, and she stands up there, and she says, and I'm telling you exactly what she said. She says, it has come to my attention that a former employee was sharing confidential company information with outside parties. She says that person has been dealt with. And she looks around the room slow at every one of us, and she says if anyone else is speaking to journalists or to strangers who come in claiming to be someone they're not, now is the time to stop. Because I will find out, and I will deal with you too. Ethan's jaw tightened. She looked right at you when she said strangers claiming to be someone they're not. Right at me, Marcus said quietly. She knows, boss. Maybe not all of it, but she knows that back table's not just some regular, and she knows somebody's talking. He glanced back at the door. I gotta get inside before she wonders where I am, but I had to tell you. Dana's gone, and she's scared. And I think she's ashamed, like she blew it, like she got caught and ruined everything. She didn't ruin anything, Ethan said. Marcus, do you have her address? Marcus did. And an hour later, Ethan Carter was standing on the sagging front porch of a little rented house on the wrong side of the tracks, knocking on a door that took a long time to open. When it finally did, Dana stood there in sweatpants with her eyes swollen from crying, and when she saw who it was, she started crying all over again. I'm so sorry, she said before he could speak. I'm so sorry, Mr. Carter. I ruined it. She figured it out. I don't know how, and now she's watching everybody, and she moved the meeting up. I heard that before she fired me. She moved it up, so you can't, and it's my fault if I hadn't. Dana? Ethan stepped inside, gentle, and got her to sit down. Look at me. You didn't ruin anything. You hear me? You are not the reason any of this is happening. Victoria Hayes is the reason. She has been the reason from the very first day. You are the reason it's going to stop. She wiped her face. How? She fired me. I can't testify to anything I got. Nothing. I'm just a fired hostess. Her laywers'll say I'm a disgruntled ex-employee making stuff up 'cause I got let go. And that stopped Ethan cold, because she was right. That was exactly what they'd say. A fired employee was a liability, not a witness. Victoria had understood that. She hadn't just punished Dana, she'd neutralized her. She'd turned Ethan's bravest witness into someone a lawyer could dismiss with a wave of the hand. Ethan sat down across from her. "When did she fire you?" he said slowly. "What day?" "Friday. Friday afternoon. And the note. The Meridian document you photocopied and mailed to Claire Bennett. When did you take it off her desk?" Dana frowned. "I don't. A few weeks ago. Why?" "Do you have anything that proves when you took it? A photo, a text, anything with a date?" And Dana's swollen eyes went slowly wide. She got up, crossed the room, dug through a bag, and came back with her phone. Her hands were shaking. "I took a picture," she whispered, "of the document, before I mailed the copy, because I was scared the copy would get lost, and I wanted, I don't know, proof in case anybody ever." She turned the phone around. "It's got the date on it, right there. 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks before she fired me." Ethan looked at the photo, and then he looked at Dana, and something fierce and protective and almost triumphant moved through him. "Dana," he said, "you just went from a fired hostess to the most important witness in this whole thing. Do you understand what you're holding? You took this photo 3 weeks ago. You mailed that document to a journalist before Victoria had any reason to fire you, which means when her lawyers stand up and say you're just a bitter ex-employee, we show them a timestamp that proves you were blowing the whistle long before you were ever fired. You weren't fired and then got angry. You saw a crime, you reported it, and then you got fired for reporting it." He looked at her. "That's not a disgruntled employee. That's retaliation against a whistleblower. That doesn't weaken you, Dana. That's the strongest thing in the entire case." Dana stared at the phone in her hand like she'd never seen it before. "So I didn't blow it," she whispered. "You cracked it wide open," Ethan said. "Now, I need you to do something. I need you to send that photo to a lawyer named Ruth Ann right now while I'm sitting here, so there's a record of the exact minute you handed it over. And then I need you to not talk to anybody about any of this until 9 days from now. Can you do that?" She nodded, already typing, tears drying on her face, and for the first time since Friday, she looked like a person who had done something right instead of something wrong. Ethan drove home with his mind racing. 1 witness saved and armored. 8 days to go. But the meeting moved up, meant everything moved up, and it meant Victoria was scared, and a scared Victoria was a dangerous Victoria, and Ethan understood he was now in a race he might not win. That night, Claire Bennett called. "I've been trying to publish," she said, and she sounded frustrated in a way Ethan hadn't heard from her before. "I took everything to my editor this afternoon. The complaints, the pattern, the Meridian document, the whole thing. And Ethan, he killed it." Ethan's stomach dropped. "Killed it. Why?" "Because Meridian's lawyers got to him first." Claire's voice was bitter. "Somebody tipped them that a story was coming, and they sent my paper a letter this morning. Very polite, very lawyered, reminding my editor that Meridian is a major advertiser, that the sale isn't public yet, that publishing, quote, unverified allegations about a private business transaction, quote, exposes the paper to significant liability. My editor got scared. He's not running it. Not before the sale closes. Maybe not after." A pause. "They're not just moving fast, Ethan. They're closing every door. They shut down the press. They fired your inside source. They moved the meeting up. They are systematically taking away every single thing you might use against them." Ethan sat with that. It was true. In the space of 1 weekend, Victoria and Meridian had cut off the newspaper, removed his witness from the building, and stolen 5 weeks off his clock. They were bigger than him. They'd always been bigger than him. And they were closing the walls in fast. "Claire," he said, "can I ask you something? Off the record." Everything with you is off the record lately, she said dryly. Go ahead. Your editor won't run it before the sale closes. Fine. But it's your reporting, your folder. If the sale fell apart, if it turned out there was fraud, if it turned out a grieving man got tricked into signing away his company, and a whistleblower got fired for exposing it, would that be a story your editor could say no to? A pause on the line, and then slowly, Claire Bennett started to laugh. You're not asking me to publish, she said. You're asking me to be in the room. I'm asking you to be in the room, Ethan agreed. 9 days from now, as a journalist. Because here's what I've figured out, Claire. Victoria's whole power comes from doing things in the dark. Turning people away when nobody important is watching. Burying an authorization on page 9. Firing a witness on a Friday afternoon. Killing a story with a lawyer's letter. Every single thing she's done in the dark. He stood up, pacing his kitchen. So I'm not going to fight her in the dark. I'm going to turn on the lights. I'm going to bring the one thing she can't lawyer away. A witness with a press badge watching everything in a room full of investors who care very, very much about their reputations. They'll try to throw me out, Claire said. It's my restaurant, Ethan said. The only person who can throw anybody out of that room is me. And in 9 days, everybody in it is going to remember that. The days ground down. 8, 7, 6. Ruth Ann worked around the clock, and every day she called with something new, and every call was a small war won or lost. She found the notary who'd witnessed Ethan's forged authorization, a man who it turned out had done 3 years of quiet work for Victoria, and had a suspended license he was very anxious for no one to look into. Under the gentle pressure of Ruth Ann's questions and the implied attention of the state bar, the notary developed a sudden powerful memory that Mr. Carter had never actually appeared before him, that the signature had been presented already signed, that he'd stamped it as a favor, and hadn't asked questions. He put it in a sworn statement. That was day 5. But on day 4, Victoria hit back, and she hit hard. Ethan got the call from Ruth Ann at 6 in the morning, and her voice was grim. She's questioning your fitness, Ruth Ann said. Formally, she filed something with the board yesterday. Ethan, it's ugly. It's a whole package. 3 years of documentation. Every missed call. Every unreturned message. Every board meeting. You didn't attend every document you signed without comment. She's built a portrait of a man who is, and this is the language, incapacitated by grief and unfit to make sound business decisions. She's got God. She's got a letter from a therapist you saw twice 4 years ago, right after Olivia died, and I don't know how she got it, but she's using it to suggest you're mentally unfit to run the company. Ethan's blood went cold. She's using my grief, he said slowly. She's using the fact that I fell apart when my wife died to prove I'm too broken to own my own restaurant. That's exactly what she's doing, Ruth Ann said. And Ethan, I have to be honest with you, it's effective. Because the terrible thing is, it's not entirely a lie. You did check out. You did miss the calls. You did sign without reading. A grieving man did all those things for a good reason, but on paper, cold in a boardroom, it looks like exactly what she says it looks like. An owner who couldn't do the job. A pause. She's turned your love for your wife into the weapon she's going to use to take everything. And that, of everything Victoria Hayes had done, was the thing that nearly broke Ethan Carter. Not the sneer at the door. Not the forged signature. Not the fired witness or the killed story. This. That she would take the worst thing that had ever happened to him, the loss of Olivia, the grief that had nearly ended him, and reshape it into proof that he was weak. That she would look at a man crushed by love and call it incompetence. He sat at his kitchen table for a long time after that call. And Lily found him there coming down for breakfast, and she stopped in the doorway and looked at her father's face. "Daddy," she said, "are you sad?" And Ethan almost said no, almost did the thing he always did. Protect her, deflect, put on the face. But something stopped him. Something told him his daughter deserved the truth, a version of it, the version an 8-year-old could hold. "A little baby," he said. "There's a lady who's trying to take away something that belonged to your mommy. And she's saying that because I loved your mommy so much, and I was so sad when she went to heaven, that I'm not good enough anymore. That being sad made me weak. Lily climbed into the chair across from him and thought about this with the total seriousness only children can bring. That's dumb, she finally announced. Being sad about Mommy doesn't make you weak. When I'm sad about Mommy, I cry, and then I feel better, and then I'm still me. She frowned at him. You're still you, Daddy. You fixed my bike. You make pancakes. You didn't stop being good at stuff just 'cause you were sad. And Ethan Carter looked at his 8-year-old daughter across the kitchen table, and something that had been bent almost to breaking inside him slowly straightened back up. No, he said quietly. No, baby. I didn't. Because she was right. That was the thing Victoria had gotten wrong. The thing all the documentation in the world couldn't capture. Grief hadn't made him unfit. Grief had made him step back for a while to raise a little girl who needed him. And the proof that he was fit, the proof that mattered more than any therapist's letter, was sitting across the table from him, in her pajamas, well-loved and well-raised, and absolutely certain that her daddy was good at stuff. A broken man doesn't raise a child like that. A broken man doesn't fix the bicycle. A broken man doesn't come back from the dead to fight for what his wife built. Lily, he said, how would you feel about coming somewhere important with Daddy in a few days? Someplace where I have to stand up in front of some people and be brave. Would you come? Would you sit right in the front and be brave with me? Lily considered this. Will there be snacks? I'll make sure there are snacks. Then okay, she said, and went to get the cereal. The whole world's problem solved as far as she was concerned. And Ethan watched her go, and understood that she'd just handed him the answer to Victoria's entire attack without even knowing she'd done it. He called Ruth Ann back. She wants to say grief made me unfit, Ethan said. Fine, let her. But grief isn't the whole story. Ruth Ann and I've been letting her tell half of it. Yes, I stepped back. Yes, I signed things I shouldn't have. But you know what I was doing those 3 years while she's painting me as some broken shut-in? I was raising a daughter, alone. And she's happy, and she's smart, and she's kind, and she thinks the world of me. So here's what I want you to do. She's going to bring a therapist's letter from 4 years ago. I want you to bring the last 3 years of my actual life. School records. Lily's teacher. Her pediatrician. Her soccer coach. I want a stack of proof that during the exact years Victoria says I was too broken to function, I was successfully raising a child, which is the hardest job there is. He was pacing now fast. A man who can raise a happy kid through the worst grief of his life is not a man who's unfit. He's the most fit man in the building, and I want 12 people on that board to understand that before Victoria opens her mouth. There was a silence on the line. And then Ruth Ann said softly, 20 years ago you borrowed a pen from a realtor to sign your first lease, and I thought this man has no idea what he's doing. A pause. I was wrong. Send me the school records, Ethan. We're going to bury her. 3 days out. 2. And then, on the day before the meeting, the last piece fell into place, and it came from the person Ethan least expected. Marcus called him at night, and his voice was strange, tight like a man deciding something. Boss, he said, I gotta tell you something, and I need you to not be mad at me. I could never be mad at you, Marcus. What is it? When Victoria fired Dana, Marcus said slowly, and she gave that whole speech about how she'd find out who was talking. I got scared. I'm not gonna lie to you. I got a family. This is my job 20 years. And for about a day I thought maybe I just keep my head down. Maybe I let the money people take it, and I keep cooking, and it's not my fight. He took a breath. And then I thought about your wife. Boss, I thought about Olivia standing in that doorway every morning saying everybody who walks through that door is somebody's whole world. And I thought if I keep my head down now, if I let them take her place and turn it into a rich people's club, and I just keep cooking to keep my paycheck, then I'm not the man she thought I was. And I couldn't live with that. Marcus. Ethan's throat was tight. What did you do? I've been recording her, Marcus said. For 2 weeks, every staff meeting, on my phone in my apron pocket. South Carolina boss, I looked it up. You only need one person to consent to record a conversation, and I'm the one person, so it's legal. I checked. I got her telling the whole staff to turn away anybody who doesn't, quote, fit the brand. I got her telling us to lie about wait times to families with kids. I got her boss. I got her from this morning telling everybody that once the transition to Meridian is complete, there's gonna be, and these are her words, a significant reduction in staff, because Meridian doesn't want to carry, quote, legacy employees. She's gonna fire almost everybody, Ethan. The second the sale closes. Everybody who remembers what this place used to be. And I got her saying it, on tape, in her own voice. Ethan Carter closed his eyes and gripped the edge of his kitchen table. Marcus, he said, do you understand what you just did? I got scared, and then I got brave, Marcus said simply. Same as Dana. Same as you, I figure. That's all any of us did. We got scared, and then we got brave. And there it was. The whole thing, the entire case complete. A sworn statement from a notary that the authorization was forged. A time-stamped photo proving Dana was a whistleblower before she was fired. 3 years of school records proving Ethan was fit. A journalist with a press badge who'd be in the room. And now the crown of it all, Victoria Hayes in her own voice on tape laying out every cruelty and every lie and the plan to gut the staff the moment she won. She'd done it all in the dark. And one by one, the people she'd stepped on had been quietly carrying lanterns. Marcus, Ethan said. Tomorrow. The meeting's at 2. I need you there. In your whites, straight from the kitchen. She's not going to let a cook into a board meeting, boss. She's not going to have a choice, Ethan said. Because the man who owns the building is going to invite you personally. Marcus, listen to me. For 3 years you held that kitchen together and you fed people right even when everything around you turned wrong. You kept Olivia's biscuit recipe alive. You slipped me cornbread at the back table like we were running some kind of resistance. Tomorrow, I need you to walk into that room and press play. Can you do that? There was a long silence. And when Marcus spoke, his voice had gone rough and thick. 20 years ago, you hired a cook nobody else would take a chance on, he said. You remember that? Everybody else looked at my record and said no. You looked at my food and said, when can you start? A breath. I'll be there, boss, in my whites. With the tape. It'd be my honor. Ethan hung up and stood alone in his kitchen the night before the meeting, and for the first time in 6 weeks, he felt something that wasn't fear. He had a notary. He had Dana. He had school records. He had Claire and her press badge. He had Marcus and the tape. He had Ruth Ann, who'd done the paperwork the day he opened and would be there when he saved it. He had, if he counted her, one small, brave 8-year-old who'd be sitting in the front row, being brave with him, waiting for snacks. And he had one more thing. He had the truth. The whole truth, not half of it. The truth Victoria had spent 3 years trying to bury under signatures and documentation and lawyered letters and a therapist's note. The truth was simple. A woman had looked at a good man in worn boots and decided he was nothing, and she'd been so certain no one important was watching that she'd let Ethan Carter see exactly who she was. And now, every person she'd ever dismissed in the dark was going to be standing in the light together tomorrow, at 2 o'clock in the room where she thought she'd already won. He climbed the stairs. He laid out his suit, the tailored black one, the one he hadn't worn since Olivia's funeral, pressed and ready on the closet door. He set out Lily's good dress, beside it the blue one. And then he stood in his daughter's doorway and watched her sleep. And he thought about all of it the whole long road from a rainy Saturday, and a little girl asking, did we do something wrong to this the night before he walked back into his own life through the front door? Tomorrow, Liv, he whispered to the dark, to the memory of a woman in a doorway with paint on her jeans. Tomorrow I bring it home. And across the city, Victoria Hayes laid out her own clothes for the morning, an elegant suit for the meeting, where she would finally formally become the thing she'd worked 3 years for. She reviewed her documents. She checked her portrait of a broken, absent, unfit owner one last time. She smiled at how complete it was, how airtight, how impossible to argue against. She had no idea that every single person she'd stepped on was at that very moment laying out their own clothes too. Getting ready. checking their evidence, being scared, and then being brave. She had no idea that the ghost was coming through the front door, and she had no idea, none at all, that the last face she would ever expect to see walk into that boardroom was the face of the man she'd turned away in the rain, holding the hand of the little girl who'd asked if they'd done something wrong. They hadn't done anything wrong, but Victoria Hayes had. And tomorrow at 2 o'clock in a room full of light, she was finally going to answer for all of it. At 1:45 in the afternoon, Ethan Carter sat in his truck outside Carter & Oak in a tailored black suit holding his daughter's hand and did not move. "Daddy," Lily said in her blue dress, her drawing notebook on her lap, because she wouldn't go anywhere important without it. "Your hand is squeezing kind of hard." Ethan looked down. He was gripping her small hand tight enough that his knuckles had gone white, the same way they'd gone white around a coffee cup weeks ago while he watched an old man get turned away for a biscuit. He made himself let go gently. "Sorry, baby." He took a breath. "Daddy's a little nervous." "You said you were going to be brave." "I did say that. So, be brave," Lily said with the devastating simplicity of an 8-year-old, and Ethan Carter looked at his wife's eyes looking back at him out of his daughter's face, and he opened the truck door. They walked to the entrance together. And at the door, the same door where 6 weeks ago, a woman in a black suit had looked at his boots and told him people like him didn't eat here. Ethan stopped. His hand found the handle. Olivia's flea market bell hung on the other side of the glass, waiting. He pushed the door open, and the bell rang. Inside the dining room had been closed for the private meeting tables cleared, and at the far end in the private dining room, with its glass doors, Ethan could see them. The suits. Meridian. 8-10 people around a long table. The silver-haired developer. And at the head of the table, standing mid-presentation, gesturing at a screen wearing an elegant charcoal suit and the confident posture of a woman about to win everything she'd worked for, was Victoria Hayes. She didn't see him yet. Ethan walked toward the glass doors. Lily's hand in his boots. No, his good dress shoes, now silent on the floor, he'd laid himself. And beside the hostess stand, waiting exactly where he'd asked them to wait, were his people. Claire Bennett, press badge clipped to her jacket, a recorder already in her hand. Ruth Ann, 60 years old, an iron-spined a leather folio under her arm, packed with 3 years of school records and a notary's sworn statement. Dana, in the nicest clothes she owned, pale but steady, her phone with its time-stamped photo clutched in both hands. And Marcus in his chef's whites, straight from the kitchen, a phone in his apron pocket loaded with 2 weeks of Victoria Hayes' own voice. Ethan looked at each of them. Scared everyone, and brave everyone. "Ready," he said quietly. Marcus nodded. Dana swallowed hard and nodded. Claire lifted her recorder. Ruth Ann simply said, "Let's go home, Ethan." And Ethan Carter opened the glass doors and walked into the room where Victoria Hayes was about to sign away his wife's dream. The talking stopped. Victoria turned from the screen, an easy professional smile, already forming the smile of a host, greeting an expected guest, and then her eyes landed on his face, and Ethan watched it happen. In real time, watched the smile freeze, watched the color drain, watched 3 years of certainty crack straight down the middle in the space of a single heartbeat. She knew him. Of course she knew him. She'd looked at this face in the rain and called it nothing. She'd looked at this face in 3 years of surveillance photos and old articles and called it a ghost. And now here it was alive in a tailored suit walking into her boardroom. "Mr. Carter," she said, and her voice, that Lake in April voice, cracked on the second word. "Good afternoon, Victoria," Ethan said. The silver-haired developer looked between them, frowning. "I'm sorry, who is this?" "This is a private meeting," Victoria said, recovering fast, her voice climbing back toward control. "Sir, you can't be in here. This is someone needs to." She looked around for staff, for someone to remove him the way she'd removed him once before. Marcus, what are you? Why is he get? This is a private." "He's not going anywhere," Marcus said quietly, and did not move. Victoria's head snapped toward him, and Ethan watched her register one by one the people filing into the room behind him. The cook who wouldn't obey. The hostess she'd fired. A woman with a press badge. A lawyer with a folio. And she began slowly to understand that something had gone very wrong with a plan she'd been certain was perfect. "Let me help you," Ethan said, and he pulled out the chair at the head of the table. The chair Victoria had been standing beside. The chair she'd spent 3 years trying to take from him. He sat down in it. "I'm Ethan Carter. I own this restaurant. I own this company. My name is the one carved over the door you're all sitting under." He looked around the table at the stunned investors. "And I believe you're all here to buy something from me that I never agreed to sell." The room erupted. The developer was on his feet. "Victoria, what the hell is this? You told us the owner was non-responsive. You told us he'd surrendered operational control. You said we had a clean authorization." "You do have a clean authorization," Victoria said, and her composure was coming back now, hardening into something sharper, more dangerous. She'd been ambushed, but she was not beaten, and Ethan had known she wouldn't fold at the first blow. "Mr. Carter, I don't know what you think you're doing, but you signed an authorization 18 months ago granting me the power to negotiate the disposition of company assets. It's notarized, it's binding. Your dramatic entrance doesn't change a legal document." She turned back to the investors, smooth again. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the theatrics. Mr. Carter has, as you know from the documentation I provided, struggled significantly since the death of his wife. This is exactly the kind of erratic behavior that necessitated the transition in the first place. If anything, this confirms everything I've told you about his fitness to." "Ruth Ann," Ethan said calmly. And Ruth Ann stepped forward and set a single sheet of paper on the table. "The authorization Ms. Hayes refers to," Ruth Ann said, in the crisp voice of a woman who'd been waiting 60 years for exactly this moment, was witnessed by a notary named Gerald Pruitt. "I have here a sworn statement signed by Mr. Pruitt 3 days ago, in which he attests that Mr. Carter never appeared before him, that the signature was presented to him already executed, and that he stamped it as a personal favor to Ms. Hayes without witnessing anything at all." She slid the paper toward the developer. "That's not a clean authorization. That's a forged one. And forging a notarized document to seize control of a company is not a business dispute. It's fraud. It's a felony." The silence in the room changed temperature. Victoria's mouth opened. "That's Pruitt is lying. That man has a suspended license. He'll say anything to." "How did you know his license was suspended?" Claire Bennett said quietly from the side of the room, her recorder up. "That wasn't in the statement. You just knew that. About a notary you claim you barely know." Victoria's head turned sharply toward her. "Who are you?" "Claire Bennett, Charleston Post. I'm covering this." She smiled thinly. "For the record." And Ethan watched the first real fear break across Victoria Hayes's face. Not the shock of his entrance. Real fear. The fear of a person who does everything in the dark, suddenly for the first time standing in a room full of light, with a journalist writing it all down. But she wasn't done. Cornered animals never are. "Fine," Victoria said, and her voice went cold and flat and fast. "Fine, let's talk about fitness since that's what this really comes down to. Mr. Carter wants to play the wronged owner. Let me tell you all who he really is." She turned to the investors, and she reached for her own folder, and Ethan saw her decide to burn the whole thing down. For 3 years, this man did not answer a single phone call. He did not attend a single meeting. He did not read a single document. His own staff couldn't reach him. I have a letter from a therapist stating he was incapacitated by grief. I have documented exhaustively a man so broken by the death of his wife that he abandoned his own company and left it to me to save. That's not slander, that's the truth. He wasn't fit 3 years ago, and he isn't fit now, and everything I did to keep this restaurant alive while its owner fell apart. Her voice rose, and there was real conviction in it, and that was the terrible thing. She believed it, she'd always believed it. I didn't steal anything, I saved it, from him. And for a moment the room wavered. Because it wasn't entirely a lie. Ethan felt it land. Some of the investors were nodding. The developer was looking at him now with something like doubt. Victoria had wrapped her theft in just enough truth to make it breathe. Ethan let the silence sit for a moment. And then he stood up. "You're right," he said. Victoria blinked. The whole room went still. "I didn't answer the calls," Ethan said quietly. "That's true. I didn't read the documents. Also true. For a long time after my wife died, I could barely get out of bed. Some mornings, the only reason I did was because there was a little girl down the hall who needed breakfast, and she'd already lost one parent, and she wasn't going to lose another one to grief." He looked around the table at every face. "So yes, I stepped back from this restaurant. Victoria's right about that. But she's wrong about what it means. Because she's asking you to believe that a grieving man is a broken man, and I'm standing here to tell you those aren't the same thing." He nodded to Ruth Ann, who opened her folio. "While Ms. Hayes says I was too incapacitated to function," Ethan said. "Here's what I was actually doing. Ruth Ann." And Ruth Ann began laying documents on the table, one after another, a steady rhythm, each one a small hammer blow. "School records," Ruth Ann said. "Attendance perfect. A letter from Lily Carter's second-grade teacher describing her as, quote, one of the most well-adjusted, kind, and secure children she has taught in 20 years. Records from 3 years of pediatric checkups, everyone kept, everyone on time. A letter from a soccer coach. A letter from the mother of Lily's best friend, describing Ethan Carter as, quote, the most present devoted single father she has ever met." She set down the last page. "Ms. Hayes wants you to believe that during these 3 years, Mr. Carter was incapacitated. During these 3 years, Mr. Carter took a motherless child through the worst loss of her life and raised her into a happy, thriving, secure little girl. Alone." She closed the folio. "I have been practicing law for 35 years. I have never seen a clearer portrait of a competent, capable, devoted man. You don't do what he did if you're broken. You do it if you're the strongest person in the room." And then a small voice spoke up from the doorway. "My daddy is really good at stuff." Every head turned. Lily stood there in her blue dress, notebook clutched to her chest, and she'd clearly decided that people were being mean to her father, and she was not going to stand for it. "He fixes my bike," Lily announced to a boardroom full of investors. "And he makes pancakes. And when I have bad dreams about mommy, he stays until I fall back asleep, even when it's really late. And that lady," she pointed one small finger at Victoria Hayes, "is the one who wouldn't let us have our table, in the rain. And I thought we did something wrong, but we didn't. Daddy said we didn't." The silence that followed was absolute, and Ethan watched across the table as the silver-haired developer, a man who kept the riff-raff out, a man who'd written, "Finally a place that keeps people like that out," looked at a little girl in a blue dress defending her father and had the decency at last to look ashamed. "Victoria," the developer said slowly, "you told us the owner was gone. You didn't tell us there was a child." "The child is irrelevant to the business," Victoria said, and it came out harder than she meant it to, and Ethan saw several of the investors flinch at the coldness of it. "Actually," Claire Bennett said, "I think a lot of people reading this are going to find the child extremely relevant." Victoria rounded on her. "You are not publishing anything. My lawyers have already spoken to your paper. There is no story here." "There wasn't," Claire agreed. "When it was just complaints, my editor killed it. You're right about that. A rude manager isn't a story." She took a step forward. "But forgery is. Whistleblower retaliation is. And a woman using a dead wife's memory as a weapon to steal a grieving man's company. That Ms. Hayes is a story my editor is going to put on the front page, and there's not a lawyer's letter in the world that stops it, because now it's true, and now I can prove it." "You can't prove anything," Victoria snapped. And that was when Ethan looked at Dana. Dana stepped forward, pale shaking, but she stepped forward and she held up her phone. "I took a picture of the Meridian document 3 weeks ago." Dana said, her voice trembling but clear. "Off your desk, before I send it to Ms. Bennett. It's got a date on it, 3 weeks before you fired me." She swallowed. "You told everybody you fired me because I stole company information. But I didn't steal it to hurt anybody. I mailed it because what you were doing was wrong, and I was the only one who saw it, and I was scared, but I did it anyway. And then you fired me for it." She lifted her chin. "That's not stealing. My lawyer, Mr. Carter's lawyer, she says that's retaliation against a whistleblower. And it's illegal." Victoria stared at her, and Ethan saw the exact moment Victoria realized that the frightened little hostess she'd dismissed and discarded had been holding a knife the entire time. "You ungrateful—" Victoria started. "I wouldn't finish that sentence," Ruth Ann said mildly. "There's a journalist recording." Victoria's mouth snapped shut, but she was Victoria Hayes, and she had climbed out of 100 corners, and Ethan watched her gather herself one final time, watched her decide that even now, even here, she could still win because she still had the one thing that mattered. The story. Her 3 years of documentation against his handful of dramatic witnesses. "None of this changes the fundamental facts," she said, her voice steadying, finding its authority again. "A forged notary claim from a man with a suspended license. A disgruntled fired employee with a photo that proves nothing about my intentions. A journalist with a grudge. And a sad little girl. Ladies and gentlemen of Meridian, this is a desperate man throwing everything he has at a wall, hoping something sticks, because the truth is, he knows he checked out. He knows he wasn't here. He knows I ran this restaurant for 3 years while he—" She turned to Ethan, and there was something almost triumphant in it, almost pitying. "While you did nothing. You want to talk about who this restaurant belongs to. I gave it everything. I was here every single day. Where were you? Where were you, Mr. Carter, when this place needed?" "He was at the back table," Marcus said. The room went quiet. Victoria turned. "What?" "For 6 weeks," Marcus said, stepping forward in his chef's whites. "He was at the back table, 3 times a week, in his old jacket, watching, drinking cold coffee. And you never once recognized him because you never once looked at anybody in this place who wasn't rich enough to matter to you." He pulled the phone from his apron pocket. "You want to know where he was? He was watching you turn away an old man who wanted a biscuit his dead wife used to love. He was watching you fire a 19-year-old kid for making a little boy laugh. He was watching you do everything." Marcus held up the phone. "And I was recording it, all of it, 2 weeks of your staff meetings, in your own voice." Victoria went absolutely white. "That's illegal," she whispered. "One-party consent state," Ruth Ann said pleasantly. "I checked. He's the one party. It's admissible everywhere that matters." "Play it, Marcus," Ethan said quietly. And Marcus pressed play. And Victoria Hayes's own voice filled the boardroom. Her voice telling the staff to turn away anyone who didn't fit the brand. Her voice instructing servers to lie about wait times to families with children. And then the last recording from just days ago, her voice clear and cold and certain, telling the entire staff that once the Meridian transition was complete, there would be a significant reduction in legacy employees because the new ownership didn't want to carry people who remembered what the restaurant used to be. Her voice saying she was going to fire almost every person in that building. The people who'd built it. The people who remembered Olivia. The recording ended. The silence in the boardroom was the loudest thing Ethan had ever heard. And then the silver-haired developer stood up and began gathering his papers. "Victoria," he said, and his voice had gone flat and final. "We invest in restaurants. We do not invest in fraud, and we do not invest in front-page lawsuits, and we very much do not invest in whatever this is." He looked at Ethan. "Mr. Carter, on behalf of Meridian Capital, I withdraw our offer. All of it. Effective immediately. This meeting is over." He looked back at Victoria one last time, and there was disgust in it now, the disgust of a man who'd been sold a lie and made complicit in it. "You told us he was gone. You told us there was no one to hurt." He nodded toward Lily in the doorway. "You lied to us, and you used us, and I want no part of it." He walked out. And one by one the rest of Meridian followed him, and none of them looked at Victoria Hayes as they went, and within 90 seconds, the long table that was supposed to host her greatest victory sat empty except for the woman herself and the man she'd turned away in the rain. And, his witnesses. And a little girl in a blue dress. Victoria stood alone at the far end of the table. Her presentation still glowed on the screen behind her, a slide that read Strategic Transition, and it looked now like a headstone. "You planned this," she said. Her voice had lost everything, the warmth, the authority, the certainty. All that was left was something small and disbelieving. The back table, the coffee, all of it. "You planned this whole thing." "No," Ethan said. And he meant it. "You planned all of this, Victoria. For 3 years. I just found out about it 6 weeks ago." He stood, and he buttoned his jacket, and he walked slowly down the length of the table toward her. "You want to know the only thing I did? I showed up. That's it. That was my whole plan. After everything, after all your documentation and your forgery and your lawyers, the one thing that beat you was that a man you called a ghost simply walked through the front door. He stopped a few feet from her. You built an entire empire on the assumption that I would never come back, that grief had finished me, that the man in the worn boots didn't matter." He shook his head slowly. "You were wrong about the boots. And you were wrong about me. But mostly, Victoria, you were wrong about grief. You thought it made me weak. It didn't. It made me exactly the kind of man who would burn down everything to protect the last thing his wife ever built." Victoria's eyes were wet now, but Ethan couldn't tell if it was grief or rage, or simply the vertigo of a person watching 3 years of work turn to ash. "I made this restaurant successful," she said. "The numbers. I made them go up. That was real. That was me." "I know," Ethan said, "and there was no cruelty in it. You're talented. You're smart. You could have been extraordinary. That's the part that's going to keep you up at night, I think. Not that you lost. That you never had to do any of this. You had everything you needed to be great. And you spent it all learning how to decide who deserved to sit down." He looked at her a long moment. "The old man in the cardigan deserved his biscuit, Victoria. That's all. That was the whole test. And you failed it every single day." Victoria Hayes had no answer for that. For the first time in 3 years, she had no answer for anything. "You should go," Ethan said quietly. "Ruth Ann will be in touch about the fraud and the notary and the wrongful termination. That part's out of my hands now, it's the laws. But you should go. You don't work here anymore." She stood there another moment, and then slowly she gathered her things, her documents, her portrait of a broken man, all of it useless now. And she walked toward the door past Dana, whom she did not look at, past Marcus, whom she did not look at, past Claire, whose recorder was still running. At the glass door, she stopped. And she turned back one last time and looked at Ethan Carter, standing at the head of the table in his wife's restaurant. "For what it's worth," she said, and her voice was almost human now, almost, "I didn't know who you were. That day. In the rain." And Ethan Carter looked at her, and he gave her the truest answer. He had the same answer he'd carried in his chest since that rainy Saturday, when his daughter asked if they'd done something wrong. "I know you didn't," he said. "That's exactly the point. You didn't know who I was, so you thought it was safe to treat me like I was nothing." He shook his head. "A person's worth was never supposed to depend on whether you knew they were important, Victoria. It was supposed to depend on the fact that they walked through the door." She had nothing left to say. The bell rang as she pushed the door open, and Victoria Hayes walked out of Carter and Oak for the last time into the afternoon, and the door swung shut behind her, and Olivia's little flea market bell rang once more and went still. For a long moment, nobody in the room moved, and then Lily crossed the empty boardroom, her notebook still clutched to her chest, and she walked up to her father and slipped her hand into his. "Daddy," she said. "Is it over? Did you win?" Ethan Carter looked around the room. At Ruth Ann closing her folio, a small fierce smile on her face. At Claire finally lowering her recorder. At Donna, who was crying again, but different tears this time. At Marcus, big Marcus in his chef's whites, who had gotten scared and then gotten brave, and who was now grinning at him across the room like it was opening night 20 years ago all over again. His people. all of them. The ones Victoria had turned away in the dark, standing together in the light. Ethan knelt down and looked his daughter in the eyes. "Yeah, baby," he said, and his voice broke just a little, just enough. "Yeah, we won." And Lily threw her arms around his neck, notebook and all. And in the empty room where a woman had planned to erase his family's name forever, Ethan Carter held his daughter and finally, after 3 long years, let himself cry. Not because he was broken, but because he wasn't. The Monday morning after Meridian walked out, Ethan Carter came back to his restaurant to run it for the first time in 3 years, and the first thing he did was fire nobody. He'd thought about it driving in. He'd wondered how many of the staff had been Victoria's people. How many had watched the old man get turned away and said nothing? How many had lied about wait times because they'd been told to? And somewhere on King Street, it occurred to him that this was exactly the kind of thinking that had built Victoria Hayes in the first place. Sorting people. Deciding at the door who deserved to stay. So he didn't fire anybody. Instead, he called a staff meeting for 8 in the morning before service, the same slot Victoria had used to threaten them, and he stood up in front of the whole nervous room, and he didn't have a speech. "Most of you don't know me," Ethan said. "That's my fault, not yours. I've been gone a long time." He looked around at them. The servers, the bussers, the line cooks, the dishwashers, faces, watching him warily, waiting to find out which of them was about to lose a job. "I'm not here to clean house. I know some of you did things the last 3 years you didn't feel good about. Turned somebody away. Rushed somebody out. Said there was a wait when there wasn't." He let that sit. "I'm not going to hold that against you. You were following orders from a woman who'd have fired you if you didn't. I know how that works. I know some of you have kids, rent people counting on you." He paused. "But that's over now. Starting today, there's exactly one rule in this building, and if you can't live with it, you should go find another job. No hard feelings. The rule is this. Everybody who walks through that door is somebody's whole world to somebody. The banker and the busboy. You treat them the same, or you don't work here." He didn't tell them it was Olivia's rule. He didn't have to. Across the room, Marcus, standing by the kitchen door in his whites, quietly wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. A young server near the front raised her hand, tentative. "Mr. Carter, what about, there's a lot of the menu that got changed. The prices. A lot of families can't." "The old menu's coming back," Ethan said. "Marcus is already working on it. The biscuits are back. The cornbread's back. And the affordable plates are back starting this week." He almost smiled. "If we lose the customers who only came here because it was expensive, then good. Let them go somewhere that keeps the riffraff out. We're going to be the place that lets the riffraff in." Somebody in the back laughed. And then a few more. And Ethan felt the temperature of the room change, felt 3 years of fear start to lift off it, like fog burning off in the morning. That was the first Monday. The rest came fast. Dana came back to work that same week, but not as a hostess. Ethan gave her a raise and a new title, guest experience manager, and told her that her entire job was to make sure nobody who walked through the door ever felt the way that old man in the cardigan had felt. She cried when he told her. She'd done a lot of crying lately, Dana, but Ethan noticed the tears had changed color somewhere along the way. "Why me?" she'd asked. "I'm 22. I was a hostess 6 weeks ago." "Because 6 weeks ago," Ethan said, "you were the only person in this whole building brave enough to do something. Everybody else kept their head down. You mailed a document to a stranger and risked your whole life over it because it was wrong." He looked at her. "I don't want somebody with 20 years of experience running my front door, Dana. I want somebody with a conscience that won't let her sleep. You've got the only qualification that matters." Marcus got a raise too, and something more. Ethan made him a partner. 10% of Carter and Oak in writing, notarized by an honest notary, this time drawn up by Ruth Ann herself. "Boss, I can't," Marcus said when Ethan slid the papers across the desk. "I'm a cook. I can't take. 20 years ago you were a cook nobody else would hire, and I said, when can you start?" Ethan said. "You held this kitchen together through 3 years of hell. You recorded that woman knowing it could cost you everything. You kept Olivia's recipes alive when the whole place around you turned into something she'd have hated. He tapped the papers. You didn't just work here, Marcus. You kept the soul of the place breathing when I wasn't here to do it myself. That's not an employee. That's a partner. Sign the papers. Marcus signed the papers. And then the two of them, who'd built the whole thing 20 years ago with a borrowed pen, sat in the office and didn't say anything for a while, and didn't need to. The story ran that Sunday. Front page above the fold, Claire Bennett's byline. She'd been right that her editor couldn't say no once it was true, and it was very true now, and she'd written it clean and hard and fair. The forged authorization. The whistleblower fired for telling the truth. The plan to gut the staff. And at the center of it, the thing that made the whole city stop over their coffee. That Sunday morning, the image of a man in worn boots, turned away from his own restaurant in the rain, holding his little girl's hand, deciding not to reveal himself so he could learn how his people were really being treated. Claire titled it simply "The Man Who Came Back." It went everywhere. By Tuesday, it wasn't just Charleston, it was picked up statewide, then further. People drove in from 2 hours away just to eat at the restaurant from the story. There was a line out the door for 3 straight weeks. And Ethan, who could have raised prices and cashed in on all of it, did the opposite. He kept the affordable plates. He told Dana to watch that line like a hawk and make sure the family who'd driven 2 hours got treated exactly as well as the developer in the good coat, and better if the developer was rude about waiting. But the thing Ethan remembered most from those weeks wasn't the crowds or the story or the money coming back. It was a Thursday about a month after Meridian walked out when the little brass bell rang, and Ethan looked up from the host stand and saw a thin old man in a buttoned cardigan standing in the doorway, leaning on a cane, looking uncertain, like a man who'd been turned away from a place before and wasn't sure he'd be welcome this time. Ethan crossed the room himself. "Good morning, sir," he said. "Table for one." The old man shifted on his cane. "I came in here a while back. Woman told me they were full. I don't want to be any trouble if it's—" "You're not any trouble at all," Ethan said, and something in his chest was very tight. "Sir, can I ask, was it your wife who liked the biscuits? You mentioned her a while ago." "Ruth." The old man's eyes went wide. "How did you?" "I was here that day," Ethan said quietly. "At the back table. I heard you. I heard about Ruth." He put a gentle hand on the old man's shoulder. "The woman who turned you away doesn't work here anymore, and the biscuits are back on the menu exactly the way they used to be. Come on, I've got a table by the window with your name on it." He sat the old man, whose name was Walter, at the corner table by the window. The corner table. Olivia's table. The one Ethan and Lily sat at every month. And he brought Walter a plate of biscuits himself on the house, and he sat down across from him. And he did the thing that another owner had done for Walter and Ruth 4 years ago. The thing the old man had told Victoria about at the door. The thing Victoria had answered by saying the ownership isn't involved in daily operations. He sat with him. And he talked to him about nothing for 45 minutes. And he refilled his coffee himself. When Walter finally stood to leave, he gripped Ethan's hand in both of his, and his eyes were wet. "You're him," Walter said. "Aren't you? The one from before. The one who sat with me and Ruth." "I'm him," Ethan said. "I thought you were gone," Walter said. "I thought this place lost whatever it had. I thought," his voice cracked, "I thought the world just got meaner and there wasn't anything to do about it." "So did I for a while," Ethan said. "But it turns out the world only gets as mean as we let it. Come back next Thursday, Walter. Same table. I'll be here." Walter came back every Thursday after that. Same table. And sometimes when Ethan was busy, it was Dana who sat with him or one of the young servers, and Ethan would watch from across the room and think that this right here was the whole thing. Not the awards, not the front page. This. An old man who'd been turned away sitting at the best table in the house being treated like he was somebody's whole world. Because he was. The legal part took longer the way legal things do. Ruth Ann handled all of it, and she handled it the way she'd promised, without mercy and without a single misstep. The forged authorization and the notary's confession went to the district attorney. Victoria Hayes was charged with forgery and fraud. The wrongful termination suit on Dana's behalf settled quietly, and Dana used the money for a down payment on a little house, the first anyone in her family had ever owned. The recordings Marcus made played once in a boardroom, played again in far more serious rooms after that. Ethan didn't go to the hearings. He didn't need to watch Victoria Hayes fall. There was no pleasure in it for him, and that surprised some people, the ones who wanted him to gloat, the ones who kept asking in interviews whether he felt vindicated. No, he told Claire months later when she came back to write the follow-up. Vindicated's not the word. She was talented, Claire, genuinely. She could have done anything, and she spent all of it learning to look at a person's shoes and decide what they were worth. He shook his head. There's nothing to gloat about in that. It's just sad. It's a whole life spent guarding a door that was never supposed to be guarded. Do you forgive her? Claire asked. Ethan thought about it a long time. I don't think it's mine to forgive, he finally said. She never actually did anything to me. Not really. She was rude to a man in worn boots, that's all, and that man turned out to be the owner, and that's the part everybody wants to talk about. The twist, the rich man in disguise. He leaned forward. But that's not the story. If I'd really been a dishwasher looking for work that day, if I'd been a nobody with no name on the wall, she'd have done the exact same thing, and nobody would ever have written an article about it. That's the part that matters. Not that she was mean to me. That she was mean to whoever couldn't fight back. The old man. The kid who made a boy laugh. The family with the crying baby. He sat back. The only reason I could stop her is that I got lucky enough to own the building. Most of the people she stepped on never got that lucky. That's the thing I can't forgive. Not what she did to me. What she did to all of them thinking no one was watching. Claire wrote that down. It ended up being the last line of her follow-up piece, and people quoted it for a long time afterward. Ethan put a new sign by the door. Not fancy. He made it himself in the same rented workshop off King Street where he'd built the tables 20 years ago, and he burned the letters into the wood by hand. It sat right inside the entrance where every single person would see it walking in, right where Olivia's bell hung. It said simply, "Respect is the first thing we serve." But that wasn't the ending. Ethan Carter's story didn't really end in a boardroom, or a courtroom, or even at Walter's table by the window. It ended the way the important things always did for him with his daughter. It was almost a year later. A Saturday. Their monthly tradition restored, now the two of them at the corner table by the window. Lily, 9, now a little taller. Her notebook, a little thicker with drawings. The restaurant hummed around them, full and warm and loud, with the particular noise of people being genuinely welcome, families and old couples, and a table of nurses just off a shift, and a young man proposing badly and beautifully 3 tables over. Lily was drawing. Ethan was watching her draw, and without looking up she asked the question she'd been turning over apparently for a whole year. "Daddy," she said, "can I ask you something about the lady? The one from the rain?" Ethan set down his coffee. "Sure, baby. When she was mean to us? And you knew you owned everything." Lily looked up, and Olivia's eyes looked out of her face, serious and clear. "Why didn't you just tell her right then? You could have told her you were the boss and she'd have had to be nice. Why'd you wait so long? Why'd you let her be mean to you for all those weeks?" And Ethan Carter looked at his daughter, and he understood that she'd finally grown old enough for the real answer, the whole one, not the version he'd give a smaller child. "Because if I'd told her right then," he said slowly, "I'd only have found out one thing. I'd have found out how Victoria Hayes treats the owner. How she treats important people. And baby, everybody's nice to important people. That's easy. That doesn't tell you anything about a person at all." He leaned forward. "But by staying quiet, by letting her think I was nobody, I got to find out something a whole lot more important. I got to find out how she treated everybody else. The people she thought didn't matter. The old man. The tired families. The kid just trying to make a little boy laugh." He tapped the table. "That's the only test that ever tells you the truth about somebody, Lily. Not how they treat the people they need. How they treat the people they think they can get away with ignoring." Lily thought about this for a long moment, her pencil still. So, being ignored, she said slowly, working it out, is how you figured out how to fix everything. Sometimes. Ethan said, the moments that hurt us the most are the ones that show us exactly what needs changing. That day in the rain hurt. It hurt you, and watching it hurt you just about killed me. But if it hadn't happened, I'd never have come back. I'd never have found out what this place had become. All those people would still be getting turned away in the dark. He reached across and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the way he had that day on the wet sidewalk. So in a strange way, that lady being cruel to us is the reason 100 other people get treated kindly now. That's not something I could have planned. It's just something I could choose what to do with. Lily nodded, slow and serious. And then, in the way children do, she moved straight from the profound back to the practical, and she bent back over her notebook. I'm drawing our table, she said. But this time, I'm drawing everybody in it, not just us. Ethan looked at the drawing, and his throat closed up. She'd drawn the corner table, the big window, and around it, in careful, wobbly, 9-year-old letters, she'd drawn all of them. Herself tall now. Ethan. And a figure with long hair at the head, drawn from photographs and bedtime stories, a mommy she'd been too little to really remember. But she'd added people this year. There was a big man in a white hat that could only be Marcus. A young woman that had to be Dana. An old man with a cane. And a whole crowd of little stick figures spilling out beyond the table, more than the page could hold. And above them all, in her careful hand, she'd changed the words from the year before. Last year, it had said, our table. This year, it said everybody's table. Ethan Carter looked at that for a long time, and then he looked up at his restaurant, his wife's restaurant, full and warm and loud and kind, every table taken by somebody who was somebody's whole world. Walter at his usual spot, Marcus laughing in the kitchen doorway, Dana walking a nervous first date to a good seat by the window, and Olivia's flea market bell hanging by the door, ringing every time somebody new came home. And he understood finally and completely the thing it had taken him 3 years of grief and 6 weeks of war to learn. A man had walked into his own restaurant one rainy afternoon and been treated like he was nothing. He could have answered cruelty with power. He could have ended a career with a single sentence and walked to his table and never thought about it again. Instead, he'd stayed quiet, and he'd watched, and he'd learned, and he'd come back not to take revenge, but to bring his people home. And in doing it, he'd taught his daughter the only lesson that had ever mattered to him. The lesson Olivia had stood in a doorway and spoken every single morning of their life together. A person's worth is never measured by their clothes or their appearance, or the shoes they happen to be wearing in the rain. It is never measured by whether you know they're important. It is measured only and always by the respect they offer to people who can do nothing for them in the moments when they are certain that nobody important is watching. Ethan Carter had been watching, and because he had an old man, got his biscuit, a brave girl, got her house, a loyal cook, got his name on the papers. A daughter learned what her father was made of, and a restaurant that had nearly become a monument to keeping people out became instead exactly what a woman with paint on her jeans had always dreamed it would be. A place where everybody was welcome. A place where respect was the first thing they served. Everybody's table. And it stayed that way for the rest of Ethan Carter's life, and for his daughter's life after him, because some things, once a man fights hard enough to get them back, he never lets go of again.